Good evening, everybody. This is a meeting of the Public Works Committee to the RTM. It is 7:30 on, what's the date, October 10th, and this is a regular session. This night we have a first selectman as a guest, which we're going to get to in just a moment, John. We have one item on the agenda to take care of. Did everyone receive a copy of the minutes and have a chance to review them? Are there any comments, questions, edits, or concerns? Before we go any further, I'm going to give you the pleasure of recording the votes, if that's okay. You can delegate that if you'd like, and here's a pen.
Oh, I got it.
Okay.
Okay, good.
So I make a move, we adopt the minutes as written.
Moved.
I'll second that.
Second by Frank.
All right, wait a minute.
You'll get that in a minute. All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. Yes.
All right, now I failed in the noting who.
Can you help him?
I think we're okay.
Okay, so.
We know Patrick's not here.
So the next item on the agenda is
I was
I'm
just
referring to as an
looking
update
at
and open discussion
the vote.
regarding the pedestrian infrastructure advisory committee, and a discussion with the first selectman, John Zgrotsky. John, thank you for joining us this evening. By way of background for the committee and for the folks on Channel 79, several meetings ago, the Public Works Committee consolidated their various questions, interests, and concerns regarding pedestrian infrastructure. By way of background, recognizing that this effort and subsequent report was originally dates back to an effort launched by the Board of Selectmen back in 2015 and has been acted upon. That effort in that report has been acted upon by various Board of Selectmen in the intervening years to varying degrees. In 2015, it was a 9-member pedestrian infrastructure advisory board that was appointed by the Board of Selectmen. That committee conducted extensive surveys of the pedestrian infrastructure in Darien with specific recommendations for improving the town pedestrian infrastructure in several what were dubbed hotspots at the time, including train stations and the school areas. That report recommended several improvements to sidewalks, maybe some new sidewalks, some installations, some intersection lighting, some signage, some improved bicycle lane signage or demarcations. As I mentioned, this committee in 2023 formed a focus group or subcommittee to focus on that report and what's happened in the intervening 7-8 years. Out of that effort, this group put together some general topic areas for us to try to have a conversation around today. Those topic areas included the town's level of commitment to implementing or continuing to implement aspects of that 2015 PIAC package. What are the town's immediate priorities around sidewalks, crosswalks, bicycle access, et cetera, especially in the context of we all had to vote on a 5-year capital forecast. I don't think it was called a plan at the time in the most recent budget session. And then we all acknowledged that a lot has changed in the town since 2015 with regard to various developments and things of that sort. How does that factor in to considerations around pedestrian infrastructure? And then it was noted that the level of funding related and around infrastructure, sidewalks specifically, has ebbed and flowed, and in the most recent session it was not funded. Everyone will recall there was a carryover amount in one of the accounts for that. So with that sort of setup and background and refresh of the past 8 years, John, I'll welcome to open the floor to you to share your perspective from the seat of the Board of Selectmen and the first selectman.
So thank you for having me. I guess I'd start off with just thanks and acknowledgement to this group. As I've said to many different groups, the gas in the tank in this town is our volunteers. And all of you have signed up to volunteer for the RTM and specifically for this committee, and the fact that you're working hard on things like this and trying to help us update that study that was conducted now, partly 9 years ago. but also the time that you've just spent in the community, kind of thinking about all that, and you've put real effort into it. I just want to acknowledge that I view that as quite meaningful. I'm very happy to sit here and talk to you guys. I'm happy to engage with you in multiple sessions, and I value your feedback and input on this. It helps us get to better decision making, and the fact that you're doing this is just something I wanted to acknowledge and thank you all for. In terms of the report itself, I guess I'd just take a step back and talk about sort of three dimensions that were discussed in there around sort of sidewalks, crosswalks, and bicycle access. And let me just talk kind of generally about that, and we'll get into both the specifics of your note and kind of where the town is going on that. For sidewalks, most of our focus is around repairing existing sidewalks. The new sidewalks that we put in are what I would call gap closing focus. So we've got sidewalks in town that are built, and then there will be a gap where you've got to walk in the street or across somebody's lawn. And we've done a fair bit of work in both those areas. A lot of the sidewalk repair work is straightforward. Quite frequently, it's complicated. I would just point to Nearwater, where we're trying to put in sidewalks that are closer down to the water. The middle section of Nearwater has actually been finished, so if you take a look at that, that's nice wide asphalt, and it looks great. The stuff that's closer down there involves tree problems, and those problems are not trivial. What's worse is the north section of Nearwater, closest to the post road, is much worse than the south section in terms of just tree blockage. And so anytime we're talking about trying to renovate or renew our sidewalks so that they can meet the needs of our pedestrians, which to the point of the note that you guys sent me is even greater now than maybe it has been, not easy at all, just fixing sidewalks. New sidewalks introduce their own challenges. I'll go into that a little bit later in the conversation. We do put in new sidewalks, certainly not at the pace that some folks might say you'd expect, given the increased focus on trying to accommodate pedestrians. But in some places where we have put in new sidewalks, they're a big hit. I would just point to the recently completed one at the Roden Heights parking over there. Just starting with the connection between Roden Avenue, down Heights Road to the parking lot entrance there. So if you're walking just to get to the parking lot there, that's been a big change. And just the sidewalks where you can go now from the Roden all the way down to the end of the Roden Heights train station parking lot, all with sidewalks, all has been recently completed. So we do have efforts that are focused on new sidewalks where they're feasible. As far as crosswalks go, most of the crosswalks that we have are in areas where they're what I would call protected crosswalks. If you look at the kind of pedestrian recommendations, a lot of those were for crosswalks where if you talk to the police department, which I did, they describe them as unprotected crosswalks. Their professional view of those is a little bit of skepticism, simply because if it's an unprotected crosswalk, if you're a pedestrian, what they've found, again, just thinking about this and their professional experience, is that it tends to encourage people that, oh, it's okay to just step into the street because there's a crosswalk, not to worry the cars are going to stop. That's actually quite dangerous, in a way more dangerous than if there were no crosswalk at all. Because if there's no crosswalk, and we've all done this, no crosswalk and you're going to cross the middle street, how many times do you look back and forth both ways? You're much more attentive than if you were walking into an unprotected crosswalk. And so when I went through this report with those guys and we talked about all that, they're very concerned about that. And so I think just this notion of crosswalks, it's pretty important that anything that we do to try to build those out or increase the number of the ones that we have, we've got to be mindful of what the police department and other professionals say about that, simply because they've got a lot of experience with those things and know where they're best to be positioned and where sometimes they can actually introduce more danger than having no crosswalk at all.
Sorry to interrupt, but what's the difference between protected and unprotected?
Stoplights.
Thank you.
So a crosswalk, say the light, where you've got a light that would do that. There are examples, by the way, of protected crosswalks where there are no stoplights. So if you go up Strawberry Hill in Stamford, up to the high school that's up there, they have a crosswalk that's got this odd kind of triangle-shaped light, and you hit the button and it'll go orange, and then it's red, and it'll stop you there. And so that's an example of one that you can't put in, which they would be okay with, but obviously it just costs more money. I've talked to parents about having crosswalks and their confusion as to why they don't exist, sometimes around a stop sign. The state on state roads has said they will not permit crosswalks to nowhere. And so the crosswalks have got to join sidewalks because they don't want people seeing a crosswalk. And a good example of this is up at Ox Ridge. So there are no sidewalks on Mansfield in front of that stoplight. So there's a little sidewalk that goes up the driveway. To be honest, I'm not sure why it's there because it goes to nowhere. In any case, it is there. And you go up to that, and the stop lights are lame because you can't look up and see which way they're going. And the reason nobody's changed that is because the state has said there are no sidewalks, there are not supposed to be pedestrians here. And so even though you look at it and say, well, obviously there should be a crosswalk there, the state's been very clear we don't permit those if there's not an obvious sidewalk to and from and across that crosswalk. So if you look kind of at our crosswalk strategy through that lens, right, where there's some either state restrictions as to where you can put them on state roads, or they would introduce a danger, at least in the eyes of the police department, and sanitize all the recommendations for that. We actually have quite a number of crosswalks in town. It's not to say that there aren't some that we could put in that I'd have to go through, and I didn't have time to go through every spot that they had and look at it through that. And so maybe there are a few that we could still put in, but by and large, it takes a lot of those out of the equation when you consider that. And then finally, in terms of bike infrastructure, I've had a couple of people come see me even way before you guys sent your note. One man came by and he was trying to create bicycle paths that would go, across Fairfield County and ideally have used the water and kind of do all of that. The basic reality is that there are a few spots where you can do that, and then you run into private property, or you run into terrain that you can't cross, or you run into kind of some other problem. And so throughout Connecticut, when you get north out of where we live, there's lots more opportunities to do that sort of thing. But this guy was proposing the section to be through Darien as well. If we come out of Row 8, and then we're going to go on Tokenique Road, and then we're going to turn left on Old Kings Highway, and then that's going to connect to the Post Road, and that's where we would go to Stanford. So that's where he was proposing that would connect through Darien. I go, okay, well, maybe Tokenique Road, but you're going to have to get the state to do that because that's a state road. On Old Kings Highway, parts of that are so narrow, you're going to have to either narrow the road, or you're going to have to take property on either side to try to build in a bike lane, and you're going to have to talk to those residents and say, are you guys okay with that? And so what I told him was, look, if you want to go through and poll all these residents and see that they're good with that, and you can demonstrate that there's real support in the community to do it, then I'm happy to get behind it. But I am not going to come out and try to talk people into allowing that sort of thing in front of their house, because what you're doing is it's not just a bike path for us, it's a bike path for people making that route across Darien. And we have enough problems with traffic and all that, and I'm not sure I want to encourage that until I hear from people that, yeah, that's really what we want, that we want that in front of our house on Old Kings Highway. And if those residents line up outside my door and say, this is absolutely what we want, okay, we can have a conversation. But that's why, even with new sidewalks, to get back to kind of that complication, there are a number of places where we simply can't put in a sidewalk because to do so, we'd have to take private property to do that. And you can go talk to those residents and see about getting an easement from them to do that. We have to pay them for that. Just like the easements we had to get for the Hanson Road bridge repairs. We had to get easements from 2 private property owners as well as Weaver Country Club. That went on for 3 months. There were disputes about that. Finally, we got to an agreement where they would agree, and these are several $1,000s, it's not a massive amount of money, before they would agree to grant us easements just to repair a bridge, let alone a sidewalk. On White Street, which is a sidewalk a lot of people have talked about for years, it hasn't been checked lately, but at the time this was a hot topic, call it 10 years ago, they were estimating that section of sidewalk would cost more than $700,000. And that's not including paying for the easements that we would require from those owners, 2 of whom had said, we're not doing it. We don't want a sidewalk in front of our house, which meant that if we were going to get a sidewalk, again, that connects the entire route, right, we'll have to sue them, go to get eminent domain and do all of that. And so there are several places in town where people have talked about wanting sidewalks where we have those kinds of operational challenges, which is how realistically are we going to get this done. And even just earlier this week, I went on a walk. These were elementary school kids that had gathered at Highland Farms. We walked down Middlesex. We walked in the grass down Mansfield, and got to the Ox Ridge light, turned left, and all the kids went in there. And it was well-meaning in the sense that they want to promote walkability and taking your bikes and 21st century, and that's a good thing. I applaud that. But we're walking down Mansfield, and we said, okay, can we put a sidewalk on that side? And I like the idea, but we're going over carefully manicured lawns, driveways where they've spent a lot of money, and landscaping and fences, all of which would have to be moved to put in that section of sidewalk. And then, by the way, let's say that's done. So, all right, so how are the kids gonna get to the start of that sidewalk on Mansfield? Well, they're gonna have to come up Middlesex. Well, wait a minute. All right, that's not a particularly safe road. It's got a double line yellow road, so we need a sidewalk there. So you can't think about these sidewalks in terms of where you would put the new sidewalks unless you've got this network view in mind that says, I'm gonna make sure that the sidewalk starts where there's minimal traffic and it's fairly safe, because that's where the kids are gonna get to the sidewalk. And then the sidewalk has to go all the way to their destination, which is that school. This is a problem we have all over town. It's a problem in all these 16th and 17th century road towns in Connecticut. It's just the way it was designed, and that it's not easy to overcome those problems. I don't want to come across as saying no to all of that stuff. We do work pretty hard to identify that. I'm just trying to convey that as we think through this and we have conversations about sidewalks and we're looking at the map and we see these individual property owners or these other geography problems, or people have said about trees, or I've had calls lately about concrete versus asphalt and people wanting concrete and thinking it's less expensive long-term, but actually with all the trees we have in town, it's actually more expensive because they crack up the concrete and it's harder to repair. And so we spend a tremendous amount of time talking about sidewalks and how we could improve that. I think as far as crosswalks, I've been clear about that, and even bike paths. Some places in town it works fine. You could put in those little chevrons or create a little bike path, and then you go for a while, and then it's a narrow road with private property on either side, and it's going to put those cyclists into the middle of a road that, other than paint it and say, please be careful, I don't know. One last comment, and I'll stop and take your questions. I was talking to the police the other day that when they've have incidents between bikes and pedestrians, or excuse me, between cars and pedestrians or cars and bikes, they say 99 times out of 100, it's the fault of the pedestrian or the cyclist, not following the rules, blundering out into the road, that type of thing. And so the funny thing is that our motorists are far more compliant with rules around speeding and all that as I've gotten into the data than you would think. And then quite frequently it's folks that are not in cars that are sometimes causing the problem. So I conclude by saying that we are very mindful of the increased need for pedestrian infrastructure. We look for ways to improve it, either by repairing what we've had or closing gaps in sidewalks to make them work better. And I think there's clear evidence of where we've done that. We do have a list of sidewalks that are being repaired. So you look at a Gantt chart here. This goes out to fiscal 29. It shows kind of where we've prioritized sidewalks, specifically what we're going to repair, what gaps we're going to close, and kind of how much money we're spending. So the Public Works Department does have that stuff. I'll make sure you guys get a copy. We're very focused on that, but I want to make sure that you guys and anybody watching, that they just know that because of our unique geography and old roads and property lines and all that stuff, it's hard to create the desirable kind of 21st century perfect complete streets, as the initiative calls them, where it works well for ADA compliance, it works well for cars, it works for bikes, for e-bikes, pedestrians, dogs, cats, everybody. Hard to do, that's all I'm saying, but I'd welcome your questions.
John, thank you for that overview. It's pretty clear that the Board of Selectmen are aware
Yes.
of the interest and aware of some of the issues and concerns. I'll open it up to the group. I know this group, there's a lot of folks here that spend a lot of time and effort on this.
Plus you talk to a lot of people, so I'm
Yep.
interested in hearing what they say, especially if you can, calibrate it against kind of what I'm talking about, which is hard to snap. There's no place where you walk in and say, well, of course, we should have a sidewalk there. Look, all this public property we should build. No. Frank.
If I may, John, first of all, I want to say I appreciate your engagement on this and the engagement of the Board of Selectmen on this. I think this has been a long-term effort of the Public Works Committee.
Yeah.
Some of us who have been here for the entire 10 years since the original PIAC report, and some of us who are later to the party. But this has been a priority for our group for a long time, and I certainly appreciate your commitment and your engagement on that. I do hear the obstacles you're talking about, and certainly agree that the geography and the details of every particular installation can be very challenging. And so that is those are the obstacles that we're trying to deal with. I think I also want to call out Ed Gentile on your team as having done yeoman work on this. I agree that most of his work has been, to your point, to repair and upgrade existing sidewalks, and there has not been a lot of new linear sidewalks put in the last, say, 5 years. I led the review group last fall, which included Vinnie Argambo, Pat Kane, who's not here tonight, Rolf Oben, and Jeff Krause, right? Jeff, you're part of the group. So our review, which we reported back to the rest of Public Works last fall, I think it was October 5th, Mark, does that ring a bell?
It was right before the end of the session, I remember that.
So we had concluded exactly what you had said, that most of the work was repair and not new sidewalk, that the handful of crosswalks that had been put in were in those protected spots, but that there were a whole lot of additional locations that were still needing the crosswalks. I also want to just bring to mind your comment that it's pedestrians and cyclists who are causing most of the problematic interaction with motorists, and I certainly take you and take the authorities at their word that the motorists are in general behaving responsibly. What that says to me is that we have addressed the easy stuff in town, and that therefore we have harder stuff that's left to do, and that there is a whole lot of non-low-hanging fruit that we need to tackle. Because you still have people who need to walk or need to cycle and who are going out into traffic. The fact that it's difficult to do it in a particular place because there's private property or a stone wall or something like that, or neighbors that have objections, doesn't reduce the need. Agreed. Right? Yep. So it increases the cost. And I hear your point about the cost of running that one sidewalk up the upper Hoyt Street. Yeah. That's been a priority for this group for years. Gardner Street's been a priority for years. I'm so glad to see the work that's been done on Heights Road, and I'm glad you called that out. Yeah. Old Kings Highway also has been a priority for a long time for us. So I mean, we'd have to decide whether given the limited width of that street, whether the width inches are best spent on a bike route or on a sidewalk or something like that. We did take a vote, Mark, right, last October, and we passed a resolution in this group that said we wanted to have we called on the Board of Selectmen a year ago to reconstitute the PIAC to deal with exactly the things that you're describing, to help set priorities and to help identify support and the hot spots in town and things like that. And so I would kind of refresh that call now to say I think the vote in the group was close. It was 5-4, but it wasn't because there was any disagreement about the need. It was just a question about how to participate and how fast to push. So
I think you're right about that, Frank. I mean, the genesis of that, well, not the genesis, but the background there being the original PIAC was put together by the Board of Selectmen. Where should this effort really be orchestrated from, at the direction of presumably the Board of Selectmen?
So if I can just finish the thought.
Yeah.
So I think we concur with you that that the low-hanging fruit's been done, that there are more challenging spots in town and probably more expensive spots in town that need attention. The fact that people are still walking in the street or biking in unsafe ways means that the need is still there, right? I think we as a group wanted to ask the Board of Selectmen then, and we ask you now, to increase the investment in sidewalks and pedestrian infrastructure in general. And in particular, I mean, Ed's been very clear that he takes his direction from the Board of Selectmen, and that we would ask you to direct him to tackle these harder spots in town that have the higher need. Again, whether you think Upper Hoyt is a priority or Gardner Street, there were, again, a number of places that have been identified in the report. You know, the fact, again, everything that you've shared, that, you know, the crosswalks are seen as dangerous. Your comment was, well, we don't want to put in a crosswalk where people are encouraged to step in the street, right? Okay, completely agree, right? But not having a crosswalk is encouraging them to cross against the, like, it's just which law you're breaking. The real solution is to have a crosswalk that's well illuminated and that has a flasher that with a button someone can push so that they can signal to the cars that they're stepping into the street before they do it. And I recognize it's more cost, but the town's got the means and the town's got the ability to do that. And so we're asking, I mean, what we asked for last year and what we asked for again is to increase the level of investment, to make sure, and to direct Ed to really tackle the harder spots now that the easier spots have been done.
Yeah, my quick reaction is rather than coming up with a budget, kind of to your point, we've got money for stuff like this, I'd rather come up with a way to identify where we would make the investments in a fashion that a reasonable person would look at it and say, yeah, that actually makes sense. So for example.
So that's what your second PIAC is for, to help you make,
Well, I'll get to that. Thank you. So for example, one of the challenges I think with the Hoyt Street investment was the limited number of people who would actually use a sidewalk like that. So it's a discrete number of commuters, maybe less now, kind of post-COVID and all, that would use that sidewalk to get up to that train station back and forth. And so if you look at that, you'd have to have an estimate, well, okay, we're going to spend that kind of money, maybe even more now than it was estimated to be back at that time. How many people is this going to benefit? It's similar to the criteria that we put in place for flood mitigation investments, right? So I'm not going to go out and spend $10 million on flood mitigation, even though there's a lot of flooding in that spot, if it only benefits 10 families or 3 businesses, that type of thing. It's unfair to ask taxpayers to make that kind of investment. So I think one of the things that would help is coming up with a set of criteria that allows us to rank where we're going to invest that money, right? I said before that we wouldn't put a budget against that, but I also think it's fair to say that we should set a pretty high bar for all that, because especially if we're going to go down the route that says we're going to put in some of those crosswalks, but they're going to be protected, separate lighting, flashing, all that kind of stuff. You know, one of those things could run $1 million, $2 million to put those types of things in, because it's not just the equipment, it's the maintenance, it's running power, it's making sure that all of that stuff. And again, I'm not saying no, but if we were to come in and prioritize this is where it's going to have the most impact for the most people, and then start by saying, okay, here's our top 5. The other thing I would say is that keep in mind, the installation of all this stuff is not done by town personnel. There are third parties that have to be contracted for sidewalk repair and maintenance, or any of the complex technical stuff that you're talking about, which have to be pretty strict state standards in terms of how they work and how they're maintained. We just have to make sure that we're eyes open about those costs. And part of the reason that we had a slowdown in investments, which some of you have noted, is a lot of that was COVID driven, where these contractors were not available. And even now, as they try to catch up, part of it is even if you have a big checkbook, there's a discrete number of contractors who are able to do this kind of work that meet the town standards. And if they're not available, or we can't schedule this work, or they can't do as much as we want, it doesn't matter how much money you have. You still have to get in line of wait behind other municipalities. So I would say coming up with a framework that will allow us to make those decisions. And I'd like that framework to be informed by some professionals who could help us sort of define the sandbox that we can play in. So for example, I wouldn't want the committee to go out and spend a lot of time coming up with lots of sites where there could be unprotected crosswalks, when we know that the police department's going to say, no, we're not putting crosswalks there because in our professional view, it's dangerous. And so if the committee's come out and said, well, we want to have all these changes made, but they don't meet those criteria, then we've wasted a lot of people's time. So that kind of gets to my second point, which is having either communication with the police and other professionals, or the assistance of a consultant who is mindful of all those things and can help us kind of constrain the solution set to things that are feasible and realistic, to use a set of words. I think that would help. And then third, in terms of reconstituting the committee, I don't know why I missed that vote last year. I wasn't in this office at that time, but in any case, I'm completely open to that. I wonder if this group is the right group to do that, whether we need a separately chartered committee, given the work that you guys have done. So maybe simply building on the work that you've done today, supplemented by perhaps some outside consulting help that would help provide professional guidance, much like we do building committees, right? So a building committee's got a group of folks like us, as well as engineers, project managers, all the professionals who are running the project, and they work in parallel. So if you guys had something like that, where you were working in parallel with, say, a professional who does this for a living and knows all the rules, has thought about ADA compliance, who knows how the state's thinking about all this, can think about sources of funding, and we'll get to that in a minute, you know, are these grants really viable, all of that kind of stuff. There are people out there who have that expertise that you could partner with. So when you come up with, you know, version 2 of this report, right, it's going to have recommendations that are within the sandbox, so nothing's crazy or infeasible. It's going to have, you know, sort of professional sign-off as a member of the committee that says we've thought about all this. And it gets back to my first point, is that it's reasonably prioritized, that we're going to focus on a few things first, and then we're going to come back to the list when those things are done, rather than coming up with something that's you know, either budget busting or simply can't be done for lack of contractors and other resources that can do that kind of work. Reactions?
I'll just add, like, so I don't know if this is the right group or not, but some sort of group to come, whatever the solution is, but some sort of group to create a framework does make sense to me, at least, because the needs are evolving, right? And you know, so the example I'll use is the gap that was identified on Edgerton Street, right? But since that gap's been identified, and that was just train commuting, now you have Darien Commons, now you have the new Palmer's project coming online, the car traffic has materially changed, the pedestrian traffic has materially changed, you have much more people living down there. And so, like, the point is that the needs are evolving, so some sort of framework that has some criteria to weigh that against all the other, you know, or any other sort of thing, I think makes sense, and you know, would be a good guide. My then push would be, if we come up with that framework, then there does need to be some sort of investment on the back end, right? So to actually
No, I'm good with
close
that. If we've got
those.
something that makes sense, where there's been a combination of citizens and professionals to come up with that recommendation, because one other, not to interrupt you, but another piece of work there is working with the community to help prioritize that. So there's actually political support that says it's this, but not this, or this is more important than this, or you had to pick, please do this first, that type of thing. I think absolutely the Board of Selectmen would be supportive of that. I mean, all of us are here to be responsive to the needs of the folks who live here. And just like you, I've gotten a lot of input from folks who want more of this type of infrastructure. And what we have to do is say, okay, from where we sit in terms of physical limitations, rules, ADA compliance, all this other sort of thing, we'll come up with a set of solutions that are prioritized and march through that, recognizing it'll just take some time. But the best thing we can do is get started. The worst thing we can do is not try to go further on that. So, good points.
Thanks, Ian.
Other thoughts?
I went through the report back from 2015 in
Lots of color pictures.
a lot of pictures, a lot of detail. I came away with an impression from the report that they were just putting together a large group of recognized areas of concern. Some of them, they were more directly said, yeah, we recommend something in a certain location, but to me, it gave me an impression that it was kind of a shotgun effect of, look at all of this stuff. And what I think didn't happen from that point forward was for someone to then filter through that in the manner that you're describing, to identify, okay, there's a lot here, but we can't do all of this, and some of this is not necessarily should be considered per se, because as I say, I think they listed a lot of things that are, some of which I would think are questionable. So I think, yes, we should come up with a reconstitution, but I think it, yes, has to go through some sort of vetting and filtering that would include the community at large as well as professionals. You showed us very quickly the spreadsheet that the Board of Selectmen has. That information is something I'm unaware of, okay? And I know that our friend Mr. Gentile likes to keep those projects very close to the vest for, I think, some interest of maybe not having to answer so much to some of the feedback that might come from the public. But I think that might be something that we should reconsider, that we be a little bit more public about what we're thinking about doing, and as you say, then justify that this makes sense, whereas for the following reasons, this does not. And so that everybody can see, eyes wide open, what we are doing and why we are, and what we're not doing and why we can't. Because, you know, there's a lot of people that are very interested about particularly sidewalks. I think another issue is public awareness. You know, you mentioned about how the police department is saying that about a high percentage of altercations are really often identified as the fault of the cyclist or the pedestrian. And I'd like to see more information going out to the public about what is the proper way to deal with crosswalks, because I don't think the average person really knows what to do. I know that the state changed the law not too long ago, I think it was 2023, where yes, a driver has to respect a person who's in a pedestrian crosswalk, but the pedestrian also has an obligation to look, even wave at the car that's coming, make sure that there's eye connection before they even start to cross the road.
I personally would want to do that.
I understand.
I'm not going to trust those
But
guys.
I think there's a lot of people who just, as you said earlier, okay, I got a pedestrian crosswalk, I'm good to go. And without paying attention to really what they should be doing. So I think some sort of public awareness and education program should be considered as part and parcel to what we do as an effort town-wide. Those are just, you know, thoughts that come to me quickly from going through the report from 2015 and how we might want to proceed. I would also mention that the committee that was done back in 2015 was an amalgam of all kinds of people from town. It's in the beginning of the report about, you know, people that were involved with developers, Baywater Properties, realtors, real estate brokers, Darien Planning and Zoning, Director of Planning and Zoning, Jeremy Ginsburg, Head of People Friendly Stanford. I mean, there was quite a list of people, maybe too many, okay? And maybe not all necessarily in the interest of Darien per se, but I think if you can, if there is a value in reconstituting the committee, then I think a similar broad brush of people with various backgrounds and qualifications that can contribute to the effort should be reconsidered as well. And those are just the thoughts that come to my mind quickly.
Yeah, my quick reaction, the funny thing is that when we say that, you know, had all these recommendations and, you know, they really weren't kind of thought through and prioritized. Actually, that's not true. They were, right? Because these guys looked at this and well, okay, it's literally every idea that you could think of. And I'm not criticizing the report, but every conceivable idea for sidewalks, crosswalks, bike access, everything, the whole thing is all in this report. And so what the professionals did at Town Hall is say, well, we have to prioritize this based on the realities of how this stuff works and where we've got contractor help and how we're going to get this done. And if you look at it, by and large, they did that. They put in new crosswalks, they closed gaps in sidewalks. There have been a lot of sidewalk repairs. There's still a lot to do, but they kind of put their own filter on it, and it was a realistic filter kind of based on the mechanics of how this stuff works. What I would not want is a committee that generates this, right? And again, not to be critical of this great work, but what this did, this was the easier part, which is to go around town and find all these different opportunities. The really hard part is to take a step back and say, what is our framework for looking at this? Much like we did for flooding, right? Which is, it's got to meet a certain criteria in terms of number of people being helped. It's got to be, so you list all that out and it says, this is how we'll decide or rank the projects that we come up with. And the second piece is to go in and pick that project and say, okay, Camp Avenue, Hoyt Street looking west. So it's one thing to just come out and say, yeah, we need a sidewalk there. Well, you know, even I can do that. The much harder thing is say, well, wait a minute. Okay, for that sidewalk here, let's go back to our criteria. It has to help a certain number of people. It has to be, like I was saying before, a network where the start of the sidewalk is a safe area where I don't need a sidewalk, and people join that sidewalk, and then it leads to places that they want to go to. And I got to look at that and say, okay, it's not just this sidewalk here. Does that feed into a broader strategy? So this is what I'm trying to connect because this is where people want to go.
So John, in
Okay.
general, can't argue with the idea that it has to be part of a network, but
You got to get
people-
started somewhere. I
yeah,
get
but
it.
people are still walking in the street for the whole length of the gaps, right? So even if you fill part of the gap,
totally get that, and I also recognize that realistically, what'll happen is let's say we have identified and drawn out this map, you still got to start by building this sidewalk from A to B, and then we finish that. Now, the next one's from B to C and C to D. It's no different than renewing the sidewalk on Nearwater. We've broken it up into 3 parts. We'll get to it, but each part's got its own challenge. Right? The middle part, easy. Hard parts are the trees on either side, and the ones on the north side of the road, I have no idea what we're going to do, because there are several trees that completely block the sidewalk. They're gorgeous, they're healthy, they're beautiful canopy. It would kill me to take those things down. I don't know what we're gonna do. There is no solution that I know of that works to solve that sidewalk problem. I've walked that 2 or 3 times and looked at those trees. I don't know what to do. So I'm violently agreeing with you, but my point on this is start with this framework that says, here, this is how we'll prioritize and make these decisions. And then for each one of these applications to come in and say, okay, if it's gonna be this sidewalk, it's got to cross this spot, it's got to deal with this landscaping or these trees, it's got to have this private property, all that's got to be worked out, and to say, okay, to do that sidewalk, these are the challenges that we've got to overcome, and that's actually the basis that we can go out and say, this is what that's going to cost and how we're going to get that sorted. So I think that's actually the much harder part of this, and as I've gotten into sidewalks and particularly looked at Nearwater and a few other places that are hot spots for sidewalks, that's identifying that Nearwater needs to be fixed, super easy. How are you going to get that done and navigate things like trees? I'm starting to get it now, but not easy. However, we are going to get that done, and we're going to march through it. And it's exactly what you're saying, which is this is where people want to be. We do not want moms with strollers in the street. All right, how are we going to get this done? And you march through it. And we've done a lot of that. I think the question is that we should be doing it some other way, and I think this reconstituted committee should start with not just that framework, but taking a look at where we are actually doing work right now and what's on the docket. Because one of the first things you want to say is, well, okay, so this is what they're planning to do, and here's the schedule, and here are the contractors, here's what's going to happen. Do we disagree with that? Do we want this one moved faster? Do we want to add here? I mean, you kind of got to start with the existing plan and say, where do I want to advance things from there? And keep in mind that, again, nobody knows everything, but Ed and his team and contractors have looked at this for a very long time, and that's their plan based on how they see it. And so you're going to go up against a professional who's thought about this pretty carefully and say, we think this needs to change in that way. And I assure you, there's no low-hanging fruit that says, well, of course you would change the plan. I don't know what he was thinking. There is none of that in this plan. I've been through this 9 ways to Sunday, and I've talked to a ton of people as far as there being some obvious place where I would go in and say, Ed's wrong.
Yeah, John, there's no suggestion by anyone here that Ed's done anything
Well,
wrong.
no, I'm not saying
Right.
that, but
What I do want to take issue with
Ed's
is
judgment is, well, yeah, we should change that or do this differently.
what I do want to take issue is that Ed has done, I think, the most that he can do within the constraints of the direction he's given, right? Which is both financial constraints as well as prioritization from the Board of Selectmen. So
I would
again,
disagree. I don't think
Well,
there's been, well,
okay, sorry.
let's have a conversation. We have actually not sat down, at least in the years I've been on the board, only since 2021. I don't ever recall an explicit sidewalk strategy discussion where the Board of Selectmen has come in and said, our strategy for sidewalks is X, would you please, as the professional, go out and execute that? Right there, it hasn't risen to the level that says, we need to now take a town-wide strategy, and our top elected officials need to come in and come to their own point of view about our sidewalk strategy, and then ask the professionals who work in town hall to go in and execute that strategy. We've not had that discussion. So in terms of Ed being told, this is as far as you can go, you can't spend more than that, hard no, not that, no. There's been no such discussion, at least in my tenure, in the 3 years I've been on the board. So the reason I'm interested in coming to this meeting and want to talk to you guys is that maybe now is the time to start to have that discussion. A ton of people have come out and said, we want more pedestrian infrastructure, bikes. I totally get that. So helping us come up with a strategy is going to be pretty important. I'm not qualified to come out and look at Ed's plan and look at all this input we're getting and saying, aha, this is the way we're supposed to go. No. We need something a lot more thoughtful, informed by professionals to say, okay, we've looked at your plan. If we wanted to be more aggressive about this, say with more funding, or do the same thing but faster, here are some ways to think about that and how you would do it and what that would entail. Because at least we can look at it and say, yeah, that makes sense as a Board of Selectmen. We would like to move forward with that strategy. But it's an informed decision on our part and not just a broad thing that says, go out and build more sidewalks. I'm not going to vote for that. I would vote for a thoughtful proposal from a group like this, informed by professionals, that I could get my mind around. That's why I'm here, is to talk about how we would do that.
John, appreciate that. Let me pick your brain on that just a little bit further. Not that the position would be final, but is your view that effort, the formation of that group emanate from the RTM, or like it did last time from the Board of Selectmen, or some input to the Board of Selectmen from a group like this? Just some
Maybe
thoughts.
I'm talking out of turn. I'm not real hierarchical about that. I mean, I have this job, but I would just work together with you guys, because I think our criteria are, we want to get people who are motivated by the topic. We want to get some diversity in terms of kind of where they come from, commercial versus residential, different parts of town, and we get to kind of think about that. The reality is you guys know probably some people who would be good thinkers about that. One thing I think we want to avoid is too many special interests, right? And by that I mean, oh yes, these nice folks here, they can't wait to get on the committee because they want a sidewalk in this one spot, and I'm not going to take any other answer. And chapter 3 is going to be all about the sidewalks that I want. So I'm not sure we need that. There are going to be people like that who want to join this committee because they're motivated in that regard. But if we get the right committee constituted, let's all work together on that. If you guys have got input, or some of you would want to serve on the committee like that, done. You've already done enough work, you're qualified, absolutely.
Yep.
We also need to agree on sort of professional support for that committee.
That's where I was going to go, John.
And Ed may know of folks like that, and I'd have to go think about that, but helping other towns, we'll find somebody who's the right partner for something like that. And I think the pairing of that kind of professional or that firm that could help with the right diverse set of folks and thinkers from the town, you'll end up with something that I think is a far more complete and nuanced view of how to do this, how to prioritize it in a way that we can move forward and start to get real results, recognizing that Rome wasn't built in a day and neither were sidewalks.
Well, John.
So then to follow on that point, recognizing that budget is policy, right? I guess what I would look for then, Mark, from our team and John from you, is some commitment that here we are in October of 24, right? We're about to enter the budget season for the 25-26 year.
Yep.
So 26 already seems like it's right on top of us. And there's no way, in my judgment, unless other people know better, that you can get a fully thought out plan the way you're describing, with the quantitative measures that you're talking about in time for the budget process of, January, February, March of 25 for the 25-26 year. So then I think what we're then aiming to do is to constitute this group, to get some consulting help promptly, and to come up with a plan and a strategy that we can agree by this time next year that would be in place for the 26-27 budget. Does that make sense?
I think that's fine, but here's the good news, right? This is not like we're doing no sidewalk work today, and we're going to get a group to come in and now figure out where we're going to spend sidewalk dollars. Not true. We've got a ton of sidewalk. Go up Leroy right now and go look at all the sidewalk work that's being done, or the work that's just been finished. There is a ton of great sidewalk work going on. The purpose of this group is to say, well, if we're going to make a step change investment, a step change strategy adjustment in our sidewalks, that's what this group is going to talk about. This group is not talking about kind of the ongoing plan and the spreadsheet that we've got here. This is not about that. This is about, in the 21st century, with all these other priorities, is there a way to rationally think about a step change in our sidewalk and pedestrian infrastructure strategy? That is a non-trivial task, by the way, but maybe with some professional help, talking about what other towns are doing, they can come in and help us develop a framework for this, and that for each project, all the challenges are identified such that that project can be budgeted and bid out, so we have a sense of that. Am I interested in committing money to this? Absolutely. We've spent about $2 million on sidewalk rehabilitation in the last 10 years and maybe $400,000 in new sidewalks, and that doesn't include, I think, the stuff in Northern Heights. So could I see that it goes to 3 or 4 million? You know, sure, something like that. Are we talking $20 million? I'm not so sure about that. So I don't know how quite to think about the investment that we need to make, but it's going to surprise me if we come up with a strategy, given the complexities of step change improvement in how we're doing pedestrian infrastructure, that we could find enough stuff to build quick enough that's going to consume a large amount of money in a short period of time. I mean, I've looked at this enough, and I've been around town, as you all have. You know, I mean, let's say you're going to put in sidewalks, and somebody decides they want to protest some trees. What are you going to do? I mean, you've got the budget, but we can't spend it until that gets resolved. Don't know.
Again, the
So-
difficulties don't go down.
Difficulties don't go down. So
Right.
here's
And
I
so
think
what
the way to
you're,
look
what
at
you're
it.
arguing for is for
Am
a
I-
portfolio approach to have more projects on the pipeline if one gets
Am I
slowed down.
supportive of increasing the budget for sidewalks? Yes, I am.
Great.
Am I supportive of trying to pull together a group to help come up with version 2 of this? Yes. Am I going to have some requirements for that in terms of how the group's going to be organized and sort of what they focus on, as opposed to having a long list of projects that aren't prioritized or scoped in a way that's thoughtful that we could execute? I'm not in favor of that. So as the group is pulled together with its charter and focus, I'm going to have a lot to say about how that's set up. And then I want to just kind of let go, because you guys are going to be the smart ones thinking about this, especially with the professionals working by your side. And I would take a step back and look forward to what you recommend.
That's a lot of good information here, John. Thank you. I want to try to wrap up, be respectful of your time, and we do have.
I had another 3 hours of material. If you
I don't doubt that you do. But is it, anyone who hasn't spoken, is there anyone to?
I'll just make a comment
Just
about.
just introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry, Eric Willis. Hi. I think we spoke about this at some point. And so I'm a cyclist, and so I bike a bunch around town. I go into New Canaan. When I'm in New Canaan, there are signs on the roads that say something along the lines of the cars have to give the cyclists and pedestrians 3 feet.
That's a rule even if you don't have signs.
I know, but if you have the signs, I don't know that most motorists know that. So has there been any thought to putting signs like that in the area?
Yeah, so it's, they're roadside signs. They're these, I don't know what you call them, but they're the kind of 2 chevrons and a bike. So you go to Norwalk and you'll see those kind of painted on the pavement there. We have none of that in town, as far as I know, and there may be a few bicycle signs. What I would really be interested in on that is what do the professionals say about all that, right? I'm talking police, people responsible for public safety and all that. If they were to come out and say, for roads that I really just can't put a bike lane in because it's too narrow, or I got all these other problems, or I've got blind curves and all that, if you were to try to make it a little safer for cyclists, what would you do? Recognizing that, by the way, it's different depending on where you are in town. In some places, there are 2-lane roads, there are a lot of trees, there's blind curves. I don't know what you put in place to make that safer. Other places, it's wider roads. Great places for bike lanes are on our state roads, which are wider, but unfortunately, none of that's within our jurisdiction. Only the state can decide stuff like that. Yeah, I'd be completely open to that. This is where I don't have a lot of professional input from traffic and public safety experts to come in and say, here's how you can start to make investments like that in a way that's realistic given our geography.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the signs would be a start to something, right?
Could be, yeah, could be.
Thanks, sir. Anybody else?
Richard Conti, Mr. Joe. I have a construction background, so I think the first thing is we already prioritize what's needed with locations. But the one thing that, on that priority list, what we should do is work on the easements and the trees and things of that nature before we roll out a full program. So the planning aspect of it is the most important, because the construction part of it itself isn't the difficult part. It's executing everything else. So trying to achieve that goal and getting progress moving forward, and then a plan should be implemented in place on which ones to start first, so that we can close out the other end with the easements, the trees, and the drainage, things of that nature that we have to work around. Those are the important tasks we got to consider. But once you execute the plan, it's,
We're not building the Empire State Building.
no, but you're gonna get the discipline, like you said earlier, with the easements, with the trees, all those things are the things that hold you up. And to have a large budget and things like this, all your important is the issue.
I have
Thank you, Rich.
new acquaintance with resistance that you can get.
I'm sure you do.
That might be a good jumping off point, John, right there.
Is there a window open? I can jump in.
So, again, thank you very much.
Yeah, I appreciate this.
Thank
So
thank you
let's
all
stay
for
in
your
touch in
participation.
terms of just I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, no, John, just to double down on what you said about budget, it's like budget, we have a 5-year capital plan in place that really has, and we've done such a good job with paving that we've never missed a year of paving in town in terms of keeping the infrastructure and the long-term view of that. Whereas we've had a much more challenging environment for sidewalks and pedestrian infrastructure, and being able to just live up to the commitments that we made in the budget already. And so, and we've got the 5-year capital plan is already in place to execute on the things that we've been doing. It's part of it is ensuring that it's enough of a priority that we actually are able to get them done over that period of time, pending the accessibility of contractors, et cetera. So I think that continuing to make sure, and I think one of the things we're doing is reinforcing the idea that this is a part of the town infrastructure, like paving, like the roads, like the sewer system, et cetera. And us trying to take a long-term view on what that is, instead of it as a project that needs to get done in a particular time frame or a window, but that it actually is within the context of an overall structure. It has to do with all of the projects we're doing, whether it's HHS or whether it's the school programs, which influence the sidewalk needs in the area around them, whether it's Great Island. All of the projects we're doing, from the paving program, all have an impact on the sidewalk infrastructure and the pedestrian infrastructure. And so that's why it's kind of got to get tied together with a longer term view. So I think reconstituting a body that can actually be thoughtful today about doing that would be fantastic. So and it sounds like it is enough of a priority to stay for us to spend the money that we are already envisioning being spent over the next 5 years. Are you comfortable that we have enough of a strategy to spend the capital budget that is planned?
For the projects that are laid out, both new and repair work, and for the money that we have appropriated for the existing plan, I'm not talking about the step change stuff that we're talking about, I'm completely fine that we'll have that money spent. In fact, some of the money that's not spent, most of it's actually already encumbered with contracts or either the plan going forward, or in a few places we've had to delay things. So for example, the lower Nearwater sidewalk project, given just recent controversies on that, they're not going to do that till next spring. And again, that's a decision just around a difficult problem that a lot of people upset and concerned about those trees. And so a decision was made, all right, instead of doing that this fall, we're going to do it this spring. But that, by the way, is an example of why sometimes the execution of this is either slowed down or becomes problematic, just because you got to navigate challenges like that. And this can be all kinds of concerns, from trees, wildlife, private property. Don't like this way this works. I don't like the material you're using. This is not well lit. Right? Again, this in a town filled with 99% type A personalities, they are all here, and they're enforced, they're well informed, they're networked, and they're not going to take no for an answer. And so that's the subjective part that needs to be figured into this. You can come up with all the solutions that you want. Inevitably, you're dealing with human beings. And human beings, as I am discovering, are human beings. And you just got to spend time to build consensus and try to assuage them when you're making changes like that. It's often obvious for a group that's motivated by a particular topic like this. For sidewalks, you go, well, of course we need these sidewalks. Absolutely. This is really important. But one of the unique things about the American system that is both good and bad, but I think more good than bad, is protection of what I would, what people call minority political rights. Okay, so examples of this are, you want to put this road in, or the sidewalks in, and in order for this to be contiguous, where moms and strollers are not out in the street, it's got to go all the way down. And I've got 3 residents that said, hell no. I'm not giving up an easement. I don't want my landscaping or my fence torn up. I paid millions of dollars for this house. Have a nice day. I'm not doing it. Right, so this has nothing to do with the plan, because the plan said, people want this is the sidewalk we need, it's absolutely perfect, it connects these 2 hubs, it's fantastic. But when those 3 people say no, right, it's gonna take months, if not years, to overcome that. And there is no way to shortcut that. We don't live in a system that simply allows government to go in and bulldoze those people like they do in places like China. Everybody, wow, look at all the fabulous infrastructure in China, right?
John,
There's a
no one's
reason, I'm
proposing.
getting a little far afield here, but there's a reason that they can get that done so quickly, is because the answer is not no. The answer is, this is what we're doing, and that's that. We just can't do that in this town. And there's a lot of people out there who want to be out there protecting their rights and their interests. And that's something you got to figure into the calculus of all this, because keep in mind, as somebody said before, and as I've noticed with this job when I took office, I walk in, where's the low-hanging fruit? It all got picked. It all got picked for sidewalks. There is, I can say this with confidence, there is precisely 0 low-hanging fruit on sidewalks in this town. And so to make a big change here, one of the things you got to figure in are these subjective factors, which is getting 100% cooperation, which you have to have to make sidewalks that are contiguous. Do not underestimate the difficulty of getting that done.
2 quick, super fast, final thoughts. If you have that schedule of
Yeah, I'll send it.
planned sidewalks, that would be very helpful, because we have not seen that yet. And then secondarily, I just want to come back to what Jeff said about the sidewalks being part of the long-term infrastructure of the town. I think the word from Ed is that an asphalt sidewalk has a lifespan of 75 to 100 years, again, precluding issues like tree roots growing up and things like that. So I think we should just bear in mind that we're making an investment that is going to yield benefits for a very long time on these things.
And he'll be in office, he'll get to actually see that. I'm not going to be in office. Yeah, I agree with that. And again, the material science people, they focus on, we actually have a sidewalk policy that defines when we use concrete versus asphalt and all that stuff. So just next steps, I'd like to stay in touch about this. Mark, you and I will continue to communicate about this. I'll add this to the Board of Selectmen agenda next meeting or the meeting after, and just talk about the meeting and discussion we've had here, and get input from my colleagues. Needs to kind of come from the board as opposed to just me, although I'm clearly supportive of this. And let's see if we can come up with some next steps that make sense, both around version 2 of a pedestrian committee to take a look at this, and a process for defining the scope and focus of that committee, particularly with regard to end products. And I think it's very different than what's in here, and I think arguably a harder nut to crack, if you will.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Have a good evening.
Have a good evening. Thank you each for your participation. Next item on our agenda is the positions, 2 FTEs, a facility coordinator and a facility maintenance mechanic for the, I'm going to paraphrase it, DPW and the DPD, the Police Department facility. I'm going to pause here because I want to make sure that that information was forwarded to you just a day ago.
Yes, I understand.
And I, when I'm in your shoes, don't like when stuff is presented to me the day before the meeting. That said, I'm prepared to talk through what we have here, but I am prepared to offer up, if at any point this evening we feel rushed, happy to set up a special session next week. Which departments, which committee reached out? Public Health and Safety. We're the primary on this. Public Health and Safety is a secondary, and I believe F&B are secondary. If we do decide to, if we don't finish up our work here tonight, we decide to have a session next week, I'd suggest perhaps we do a joint session with Public Health and Safety. I'm going to offer that up from the onset, so no one feels like we have to try to get through it this evening. That's it. I'm happy to get through it this evening if it's what we want to do.
Well, the total amount of dollars at issue here is not dramatic.
Well, it's all in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? It's $152,000 for an annual basis for
Okay.
one position. I believe that's the facility coordinator, and 123 and change for the facility manager.
It's more than I had recalled.
The amounts in the-
It's 90 in the 6 months that we're
Yes, I
talking
thought it
about
was-
now, and then it's got to go into the budget next year.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
it's really, so for the exceptional part is just the 90.
Correct.
Right, so that's what I was recalling, is less than
Yes.
100 grand.
Yeah, it's about half.
Yeah.
What it is, that's 6 months. The
6 months.
presumption
Yeah.
is
To
you won't get
start
this
it,
in
and
place
then it
before
will become-
January, and let's be realistic, how fast do things move. But you're exactly right, and you're right as well. But I didn't want
No,
to
no.
hang out there that it's
Thank
not.
you. That makes me feel good.
You're both right.
Everyone's above average.
So I'll do a quick recap, if that's okay, and then we can
Please
kind
do.
of go from there and see how far we get. So anyone who watched the video clip I sent, Ed's presentation was, in my opinion, very good, as it usually is. It is for 2 FTEs associated with this ultimate resolution. You may recall, I did not, but I recall once I saw it in the video that the police department had requested numerous capital projects subsequent to the budget wrapping up last year. I hadn't focused on that. And those items have been budgeted out of the reserve for capital non-recurring expenses. Partially as a result of that, the Board of Finance, well, they used the contingency, but First Selectman had requested that Ed assume responsibility for the police department going forward. I think my takeaway from what I've read and conversations I've had with, or emails with Ed, with Board of Finance representatives, et cetera, is some of that capital projects, maintenance type of items, perhaps could have been anticipated or forestalled, put off, had some proactive maintenance or been involved. More background about this is the consensus of the committee was that with all that's on its plate between the DPW capital projects, this year the past couple of years he's been working to pursue several of the ARPA projects, right, which are, many of them are incremental to what you normally have going on, and let's not ignore Great Island and all the effort that's going into there. There's a lot of work already on the existing DPW's plate, and it was stated multiple times that this building is particularly complex because of some of the systems in that building. Here's the point I was trying to get to. Ed mentioned during the video, and then also in his write-up, that he believes all outside contractors should be supervised. I believe that's probably which role would be that? That would be the mechanic. That would be the facilities coordinator supervising, to try to, more eyes looking on a project versus less is better. Perhaps certain things could be caught during the process versus after a project is completed and a problem arises. So Ed and the police department approached John to come up with some solutions. They worked with Jack Davis in Finance and Budget and Jen Charneski. And in general, this is what you see before you is the solution that they came up with. But the positions are really being driven by Public Works. Even though, as you saw in the material, the role of facility supervisor has been split up amongst multiple personnel currently in the PD who are not trained to supervise and manage facilities. So I'm just going to hit, there were 2 more points I want to make because they were, I thought, encapsulated nicely in the materials, and in case you didn't read them. Why are these positions necessary? So currently when problems arise involving the police department facility, they are reported to the Administrative Service Bureau Captain. It's an Administrative Bureau and the Service Bureau Captain. None of our past current Administrative Service Captains have any knowledge or background experience in building maintenance or repair. Then once a problem is reported, the captain then reports the problem to a member of the Public Works, who, along with his or her peers in the public works responsible for the area, responds to address the issue. So you've got all these handoffs going on, and the initial alert is being made by someone not trained in facility maintenance. This is a very reactive process that often is initiated at the point in time where repairs, a problem has occurred, repairs are very costly, or may even require full replacement of a system and hardware. It's become evident that if a separate police department employee was assigned to the facility maintenance full-time, many of our past repairs would have been less costly or perhaps even avoided completely. So the idea here is to put someone in trained to try to avoid these types of complications. And said during the meeting was that also frees up PD personnel trained in law enforcement to do what they're trained to do. And then the role of facility maintenance mechanic. Currently, town has only one for the entire town-owned facilities. That excludes, of course, Board of Ed. The additional mechanic would perform the same basic duties as the current mechanic, as the current workload, which is now includes Great Island, some of those incremental items I already talked about, has become unmanageable with only one skilled staff person. This new mechanic will be dedicated approximately 50% of the time to the PD facility and the balance of the time. Remember, that facility operates 24/7, 365. It's not like the rest of our buildings, which get shut down, and presumably that's when some work can be done. And then the other 50% would pick up the overflow that the DPW is handling right now. So I understand from Ed that the intent was to have the facility coordinator 100% allocated to the police department. So the additional coordinator dedicated to that facility, and the facility mechanic, as I said, split 50-50. We talked about the cost. I won't go back over that. And oh, I'm sorry.
I do have one question about the facilities.
Thank you.
Thank you. About the facilities coordinator being 100% dedicated to the police department. Is there any flexibility for that person, that if it wasn't a busy day at the police and something was happening somewhere else?
I'm going to answer that question not having asked Ed directly, just knowing how Ed, if this is all under the purview of Ed's team, I can verify, but I would assume yes.
Okay.
I would assume yes.
I mean,
I am stating I'm assuming. I've not
I mean, I have to
verified.
assume that the police department will need somebody 90% of the time, but I guess I would just be curious if there's some flexibility.
I would assume that. I will gladly confirm with Ed. But I think most of us around this table would expect that would be the case.
So just to clarify, both these roles will roll up to Ed and will be Ed's staff to manage?
That's my understanding.
But the expectation is that their workload and time assignment will be either 100% or mostly
Right.
for one, the PD, and 50-50 for the other.
Yeah, I want to actually go back and on that
Mark,
reporting
if you
part.
look at the end of that video, that's actually not the case.
Yeah, I know.
They're
I
going
think
to
the-
report to the police department.
Right, but we'll be
In conjunction with reporting
Ed.
to Ed.
Yeah,
But
I think it's in the body of
that the captain or whoever has been doing this forever is going to be the one.
that he reports
Kind of like a
to day to
building
day.
administrator or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So while Ed made it clear to me he's managing the work,
Yeah.
I think the reporting line is exactly what
So the formal reporting line is
To the police. To the
the dotted
police,
line
dotted
is
it,
to.
and a lot of this has to do with a request by the Board of Selectmen or a clarification on who is responsible for the budget at the police department as it relates to all of these things as well. And they wanted that to live in the police department and not be, as Ed had to say, he's not going to disappear, but he's not going to be as involved as he's been made to be involved because of the problem.
But the point is you have someone trained in
Yeah,
facility
yeah.
maintenance.
I mean,
You've
they're
got
gonna
a
put the right
trained,
people
you've got a
in.
trained resource in the police department, funded by the police department, reporting to the police department, but getting some oversight from
From
Public
it.
Works because he's got additional expertise. That's-
Right, I mean, it's crazy that there hasn't been somebody in this building, like, who's not an expert. There should have been an expert in this building.
From day one.
Yeah,
Right.
that building is crazy.
Yeah, ever since the remodel.
Yeah, and that's what they said, Ralph. They were like, it's.
When you read about the systems that are in this
Yeah.
building, the negative
I forgot there was a
vacuum,
shooting range.
There
yeah,
is.
and the
Yeah.
negative,
Yeah,
negative
which is cool,
pressure.
but-
Yeah.
Yeah, they said they can't get you can't get either the rooms cold, hot, whatever the deal is. This
Yep.
is, to me, it seems like a very good request of Ed's and the police department, and sort of something that makes perfect sense.
I agree, but I
Um,
wanted to present. Now,
yeah.
I'm not clear, I believe the mechanic will report to Public Works, I'm not certain of that.
I'm not certain about that either.
Yeah.
I mean, it might
That
make
one looked
sense.
to be a
Yeah, I-
DPW person.
Yeah, I think you're right. The
Yeah.
mechanic is gonna be under Public Works, but
Yep.
he's gonna work in conjunction with the.
Right, he'll be
gentleman
splitting
who's
his
on
time
site.
over there.
50-50, right.
So call it a dotted line.
Right, I mean, the story about the pipes in the attic.
Right.
Had the wrong
Had
solder.
the wrong
on them,
solder, and that's
then
where-
were leaking for God knows how long. It caused a huge problem.
In the new building.
Yes,
Had to go
because
and-
nobody was like walking the building on a regular basis. So these things just leaked in the attic for
Yeah.
ever.
The wrong solder was
Yeah.
used, and now to go and replace the solder on the pipes behind, I mean, what a mess. You can only imagine. So that was an example that was
Yeah.
used, I mean, there were others, but.
It makes sense to me.
So the point being that a trained person would have recognized that earlier?
Potentially.
Yeah.
At
But
least
it sounds like bad
somebody's
construction.
at the facility.
Well,
somebody
no one denied that either.
He's
Yeah.
working in that building all the time.
Yeah, working the building, walking the building, getting to know the building and all that.
It
I
might have
guess a
prevented
big
it, might
enough
have
place,
detected it
complicated
sooner.
enough place that it
Yeah.
Yeah,
needs
it's
a
thir-
dedicated
it's
person.
34,000 square feet, which is a pretty good sized building. And as mentioned, there's numerous different systems in there.
It's complex.
And there's a whole computer room that was overheating because the centralized air conditioning was not adequate for the room's requirements with all the heat that computer equipment generates, so they had to bring in a whole separate cooling system just for that room. And that's just, one example of some of the different types of problems that they run into in that building. My only concern is, I interpret this to be a person who's going to set up a regular maintenance schedule for all the mechanicals in the building, and as it said in the write-up, supervise contractors and that sort of thing. And I'm hoping that in doing that, they're going to find problems that are developing, but are going to be addressed before they turn into a disaster, okay? And what's happened in the past is the disaster happens and then they deal with it. And that's much more costly. You're bringing in people on an emergency basis. It could be on a weekend. It's very, very costly, overtime, whatever. And I'm hoping that they're gonna, with this person involved on a full-time basis, is going to stave off a lot of that sort of thing from happening. That's what I'm gonna be looking for as time goes by. I think one of the representatives of the Board of Selectmen said, and I believe the first selectman concurred, that they should keep some sort of log,
Mike suggested that.
okay, about what work was done, what did it cost, what was the problem, how were they able to deal with the problem to keep it from developing into a bigger problem, so that we can have some sort of log that we can look back on a year or two from now and say, okay, this was worth it. Because these are full-time jobs with benefits. It's not just the 6 months, we're talking about years and years.
Perpetuity.
And it's gonna mount up over time. These are union positions, so.
Well, I mean, in fairness, I've worked in facility management, and other folks in town have as well. This is something you can hire a company to do this for you. Like, I mean, the one I was with was JLL, but there's plenty of other facility management companies out there. If we don't want to put somebody on staff, you can contract with an organization to provide the service. I mean, 34,000 feet is a sizable building, but I have certainly seen individuals who manage facilities who handle 10 to 20 times that amount of square footage on an individual basis per year. Granted, this police station is maybe more dense and more complicated.
It's a specialty building for sure.
100%. So you can't just kind of find this expertise off the shelf.
And I would say that any decision to outsource facility management is not just about this building. That's more of a
Yeah.
town-wide decision. So it
Strategy.
would be a big strategy shift, which we can debate, but that's bigger than this particular.
I agree with that.
Fair enough, yeah.
go one-off.
Well, and it's the police.
With the most complete,
Yeah.
most, with the most complex, and it's a police building.
It's the police
Yeah.
department, right? I don't know if I want to outsource access to the police
I
department.
bet they don't want to.
Yeah, they definitely.
Oh, they definitely don't want it.
I would
I'm just saying, if there's a reluctance to bring a staff member on, you can do that on a temporary basis while you evaluate what you need to do long-term.
Right.
Doesn't seem like there's a reluctance.
No, there wasn't.
The board of selectmen was like, yeah, this is, you know,
But
enough of it.
I would just clarify one thing, Rolf, just having looked it up, the police department position is non-union, the public works position is union, so it's a split.
All right, thank you.
So I did reach out to Ed about this, and I can't remember who was talking about. The intention is to realize operational savings through proactive and preventative approach to this facility's operations management, more consistent with the fleet of buildings operated by the DPW. I posed that to Ed, and that's the idea, is to get ahead of the problems before they become problems that are now expensive to fix at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night type of thing.
Well, it also sounded like it's frees up Ed's time. Like he's
Well,
running
that's-
over there
he
all
said
the
that.
time. He's like,
He said that in the meeting.
The house is on fire every night, right?
Right, because all he's getting is emergency calls.
Right, exactly. And the emergency people are, you know, they don't get to go on vacation. They get pulled over there at all random times. I mean, it's crazy. And the fact we have a captain in the police force who's responsible for the maintenance.
Facility management.
Is crazy.
Right. So, and then the last thing I'll add is, as far as the accountability and the measurement, how effective this is, Mike Burke brought that up at the end of the meeting. You saw that, and then communicated with Jack Davis, who suggested that perhaps to Ed, that he report on inspections relating to the PD facility, inspections that have been performed, work that's been performed, projects underway, as part of his quarterly reporting. There'll be now a section, ideally a section specific to that facilities coordinator and what those activities. So it'll be visible what's going on, and or what's not going on for that matter. So those are the comments I had in going through the materials, the video, reaching out to Board of Finance, Ed, and F&B. I will pause there.
Any other comments?
Any other comments, questions, or concerns? Okay, I'll entertain a motion on this.
I'll move.
A second.
Okay. All in favor of the appropriation, let me record it exactly.
Okay.
I didn't mean to wake you.
The appropriation to fund 6 months' salary for a facility coordinator and a facilities maintenance mechanic for the Darien Public Works Department, the Department of Public Works, and the Darien Police Department. All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you.
Unanimous. But now,
Thank you very much, Mr. Lynn.
okay.
Well,
Easier than you thought, huh?
Okay.
well, you never
So-
know. You never know. Thank you for that. And the only other thing on the agenda for this
So I
evening
say,
is to go through the focus areas.
yeah,
Um,
right, okay, so, why, yes, yes.
We hanging tough, we want to go a few more minutes, well, we can,
Yes.
I'll just,
I'm sensing efficiency.
are we? Yeah, we're on a roll, right? Nothing like a couple of baseball games to keep us moving. All right. Focus areas, I'm just going to go over them, and if you have anything to report, just let me know. Finance and budget. Roads and sidewalks, I think we're probably.
We'd beat that up tonight.
Dams and bridges.
I will will note on the sidewalks that there is the ongoing controversy about the sidewalks versus the trees on your water.
Oh,
And
I
I have
think
heard
we're
from
all aware of that.
I have gotten a lot of constituent input
Yeah.
on that,
And at Great Island.
and at Great Island as well. So
I'll
it's
touch on that on my
very hot.
comments.
Yeah.
Recycling pages in here, flooding.
It's been a dry September.
Around here it has. For a change.
Out of it.
Sewers,
And no news.
no news there.
The only thing I would say about sewers is I watched their last meeting, and they are definitely starting to formulate some sort of, whatever, agreement, if you will, with all
Standard?
of this, no, with all of the sewer users in town, that they sign off that they do not have any illicit
Like an
Some
attest
pump
station.
Oh,
hookup.
yeah.
Like an attestation, you have to, like, it'll come with your bill and you have to attest.
Yeah, something like that. It's in the works. They're still putting the wording together. They're still working with council on it, but it's definitely something that is in the works, because they're finally, I think, concluding that they need to do something about the I&I that's coming from the illicit connections. And so they're finally starting to do something about it. Now, when's that gonna all come to fruition? That's still gonna be, I think, quite a ways off, because they're still, it's a work in progress. But I think they're getting serious about it. That's the overall.
And what will their, just to ask, what will their enforcement?
Well,
I mean, will that attestation include a,
I think if you don't,
Right to
if you
inspect.
don't sign off and send it in, I think they're gonna charge you for, send you a bill, and then they'll continue until you do sign off on it. And then if they,
Bill for what, though, would that be?
well, a bill for signing off on the fact that you haven't signed off that you haven't got an illicit connection, okay? They want you to sign off and say, I do not have an illicit connection. They want you on record, and then they're gonna watch and see, because they know where the water flows from. And then they're gonna go back to their records and say, okay, who has not sent in something about their connections?
Focus there, maybe.
And they might start to, look at those people more seriously to trace down where the I&I is.
Interesting.
Okay, so it's kind of like, almost like detective work.
What happens if I attest, but that's because I am ignorant, and I'm assuming there's nothing, and then it turns out
Ignorance of
there-
the law is.
Yeah.
Well, I think that depends a lot on what they come up with, which
Yeah.
is still in.
Yeah, I think there'll be some
progress,
wording
but-
to the effect of, if you're unsure, then, get someone in to look at your system.
We'll come and look for you, right? They'll-
Where would this question come up now? Say on the bill? I
I
got a
think
sewer,
I
I
think-
got
I
a
think-
sewer bill and.
Yeah, no, it wasn't in this bill, and I'm not sure we'll
No,
come
I mean, I'm
necessarily
talking personally-
with your bill.
personally, if-
I think it'd be a mailing.
A mailing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Roll. Towns and building, town and buildings, I think we covered buildings. I don't know if you found that.
I'm one of them.
Yeah.
I think we talked about buildings.
We're good. All right, well, that's, we're up to Great Island. I'll do a brief update, but the main thing is, I also am aware that I'll be presenting at the next RTM an update to the entire body. But I got a few highlights here. As you know, the workshop 1 is called, was held September 23rd. There were approximately, depending who you talk to, 50 to 70 attendees in Town Hall. 110 to 130 attended the late day session out on Great Island. There were walks and there were stationary exhibits, as you know. And there were, information was gathered, call it a survey, was done on site with stickies and also with questionnaires. And that information has been fed into the Hildebrand. They have not reported back on that information yet to the GIAC.
is the survey still open?
Yes.
I'm getting to that.
Sorry.
I'm getting to that. The online website was launched, Great Island at darien.ct.gov. The townwide survey opened up right after the workshop,
Mhm.
and it is open. I can't remember how many hundreds of responses they already had as of the last GIAC, but the comment from Reed Hildebrand was it was an extraordinary response. We all know this town.
Last number I heard was up to about 600.
Yeah, I heard over 400. So we all know this town's highly engaged, so that didn't surprise me, but they were surprised, which is fine. So it's on that, you can go to that website. I believe, in my opinion, there was extensive outreach. You recall last meeting, I mentioned that each of the GIAC members were responsible for reaching out to a couple of organizations about the activities of the GIAC and making them aware of the initial workshops. That outreach was doubled down to make aware of the survey. You all hopefully received a notice in your RTM mailbox probably 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, about the survey. it's been put out, but I put it out here. Encourage your friends, family to
So
respond.
it's still open until?
Oh, I'm sorry, October 15th. October 15th.
Another 5 days.
Another 5 days.
Yep, yep. And if you haven't taken it, it's not just a multiple choice questions. There are input areas
Mhm.
where you can comment.
Mhm.
And additional feedback from Reed Hildebrand is, it's extraordinary how many people went out of their way to fill out
Good.
the write-ins, which means that all has to be processed and consolidated for the GIAC. You may be aware that GIAC recommended to the Board of Selectmen a revised set of rules and access requirements and recommendations for improvement, all of this in the spirit of trying to increase access. That was put forth to the Board of Selectmen, and I saw that the Board of Selectmen acted upon that at their Monday meeting. It was touched on in this meeting, but I saw at the Patch reported earlier this month that a resident has filed an appeal objecting to the decision of the tree warden regarding the removal of 15 odd trees. That's going to stall 23A, AKA the road
I think there was
construction.
a second one filed as well.
There may have been.
Not from the neighborhood that's doing that. Not that I'm agreeing with it, but.
Oh, that's your prerogative or their prerogative.
Yeah.
So the project, I won't say is on hold, but is delayed pending the outcome of that process. Because I mentioned it last time, I'll mention it here, there was possibility of a horse event being hosted on an island. Consideration of that's been deferred at least until next year.
So is it just a single event as opposed to like?
Yeah, it was
It was a single,
Pop-up.
it was a pop-up.
Yeah.
Polo contest, polo bowling
Yep.
contest.
And then, as I mentioned, I'll be
So
providing
it
an
didn't
update
happen.
along these lines to the full RTM, probably a little more robust than this. There's one more meeting between now and then of the GIAC. If you've watched any of the meetings, you know that access has been discussed a lot. And that's what prompted a review of the rules and the guidelines and the recommendations made to the Board of Selectmen. As you all know, ultimately, the Board of Selectmen is the one, the body that makes decisions. But, and coming up with those rules and the opening of access also involved a lot of recommendations around observations around how to open up the access, where might signage be needed, where might areas need to be roped off, safety, potentially dangerous steps, stuff like that. Not that the GIAC has any expertise, but just observations for staff to consider. So that's pretty much the update on Great Island in summary form. Next item is sustainability, coastal waters. Last meeting you were in the coastal waters. Before the meeting.
Just one thing about the Great Island, I know in one of the more recent meetings, there was a pretty, shall we say, extensive discussion about accessing the island to dogs.
Yes. Yes, that there was. Yes, there was.
And was there a conclusion?
It's no dogs,
No
right?
dogs.
No dogs.
It
They
remains-
held off for now, but I don't think that's going to be the end of it.
No, but you're right. It's been held off for now. No decision.
No change, so it remains status quo, no dog.
Yes.
And is that being enforced? Because I see a lot of dogs.
That's a question, Frank, that I'm going to defer on because all over town we have those issues of where dogs are allowed and not allowed and enforcement.
Okay.
I think the enforcement is consistent across town.
Yeah. All right.
Like that, Rob? I'll entertain a motion. Thank you.
As
very much.
illuminating as ever.
I set that bar high.
All in favor?
Thank you. All right, thank you all.